Reiver Lieutenants are unsurprisingly lieutenants, second in command to captains, that wear Reiver armor and specialize in the shock assault tactics of the Reivers. They are a rather recent development in Space Marines, and unfortunately, this video isn't going to be very positive, if you couldn't gather. So, I'm Spoons Rattling, and today we are covering the Reiver Lieutenant. So, the Reiver Lieutenant comes in at 55 points for himself. His stat line is pretty standard: 6 inches of movement, toughness 4, 3+ save, 4 wounds, leadership 6+, and OC 1. A solid enough character stat line for 55 points, but where things really start to fall apart is our weapons. So, in one of the longest weapon names in the game, we have the Master-Crafted Special Issue Bolt Pistol, which is precise, with 1 attack, that hits on 2s at 12-inch range with Strength 4, AP 1, and Damage 2. Then, the Combat Blades are in melee, which are precision, 6 attacks, hit on 2s at Strength 4, AP 0, and Damage 1. While the pistol is a fine enough pistol profile, his melee profile is quite bad, and also really isn't super adept at taking buffs. Its precision isn't a super useful rule, which is unfortunate. And then his abilities, he only has Scout 6 inches, and of course Leader. Then in abilities, he has Tactical Precision while leading a unit. Weapons in that unit gain lethal hits, which is a solid enough buff. Then Terror Master, expanding the Terror Troops aura of Reivers by 3 inches when he is leading them. So, as a overall review of his stats, we have a very okay pistol. I'm not going to call his pistol bad, because I don't think it is, but a character's pistol is usually not why you buy them. Their melee is extremely weak, and unlike the, say, Phobos Lieutenant, it doesn't have a good special rule, where Sustained Hits 1 is generally useful, Precision is niche, and actually can be accessed for just a command point by any other character, making this guy a very poor character assassin, not even to mention its innate lack of AP, meaning it will struggle to kill anything with a 3+ save or higher, so other Space Marines or things of that nature. The lethal hits is a solid enough buff, but at this price point you could just get a Phobos Lieutenant who also has a better special rule. And then, as I mentioned, his stats are actually fairly okay in terms of raw stat lines, just his weapons really let him down, as well as his special abilities. So the Reivers are the only thing he can lead, and surprisingly, where you think this guy would be, right at home with the Reivers and would make them significantly better, it's actually quite the opposite. So Reivers as a datasheet are quite weak on their own, and the only reason that something like a Phobos Lieutenant makes them usable is because of their Deep Strike shenanigans they can do with moving after coming out of Deep Strike, which is a fun enough strat as it is. However, this guy, despite being a Reiver, cannot take a Grav Shoot, which means he doesn't have Deep Strike, so they're forced to deploy on the board and use their Scout move. Now, needless to say, this is a huge detriment to the Reivers, whose best attribute is undeniably having cheap Deep Strike. His damage is also very bad, and the lethal hits doesn't do much to buff that, and unlike the Lieutenant, his special rule on his main weapon is of course quite weak. Precision, as I mentioned, is niche and can be accessed by any character for 1 CP. As I mentioned, his damage doesn't help, and is poorer than the Phobos Lieutenant. And circling back to that Phobos Lieutenant, he is better in every single way. He doesn't restrict the Reivers, as he has Deep Strike, Scouts, and Infiltrators, so you can deploy them in any way you want. His main benefit is, of course, that Deep Strike, which then allows him to shoot and move, because his secondary rule is actually good. I didn't mention it much, but this guy's special rule is god-awful. The reason I say that is because Terror Troops, the aura that these Reivers have, is already quite niche. The -1 to leadership is a okay enough debuff, and they do force tests semi-frequently, but that doesn't really change that much because the Reivers want to be in melee anyways, which means that just having a little bit of extra range isn't as impactful as actually getting into melee, which the Phobos Lieutenant lets them do much better anyways. We're going to quickly run through the Core Codex Space Marine detachments. The Gladius detachment is, of course, the take-all-comers. There's no unit that's specifically bad in Gladius, but this guy is not worth the points on enhancements or stratagems, because he doesn't have any help for delivering his main unit, though I guess Advance and Charge is not the worst thing, as they will need to be foot-slogging. Not that they would do much when they get there. These guys really need to pick their targets properly, and foot-slogging melee units generally don't have that choice. The Anvil detachment is pretty pointless. They have a Feel No Pain enhancement when you're on an objective, which is good, but since this guy can't Deep Strike, there's really no benefit for it, as the Reiver's main use is to Deep Strike and steal a backfield objective. And then Iron Storm he's not great either. He's again very slow, no Deep Strike, which means he isn't much use as a grunt, and of course the Reivers themselves aren't objective-grabbing experts, so in general they do very little there as well, and are again outclassed by the Phobos Lieutenant. Firestorm, pretty much the same thing. His pistol is a bit better at close range, which is a fine enough buff. It makes it basically a heavy bolter, but he is again outperformed by that old pal, the Phobos Lieutenant, and not even mentioning other better characters. Stormlance has that +1 to wound and reroll charges. The strength enhancement could be useful, but again, as I mentioned, it's going to be better on the Phobos Lieutenant, who can deep strike and then steal the backfield objective. In Stormlance specifically, he gets that extra +1 to wound, which is very useful with sustained hits, as I've mentioned. And Vanguard, again, Vanguard surprisingly doesn't have that much to help these guys, and his damage is very bad, and again, no deep strike. First Company Task Force, he can do the Mortal Wound Bomb thing, which is okay, but once again, I'd say better on the Phobos Lieutenant, as the Phobos Lieutenant can deep strike anywhere on the field, meaning he can snipe out more fragile things much easier. So, if you didn't get the theme of this video, the Phobos Lieutenant, Reiver Lieutenant is probably the worst data sheet in all of Codex Space Marines. I can think of at least niche uses for almost everything else except this guy, excluding, like, Titans and stuff, because that's not... I'm talking the core game. I think he's in contention for the worst data sheet in the game. He actively hurts his unit by leading it, as they can't use their deep strike. He doesn't really... He doesn't actually, like, do anything. Lethal hits is a fine buff, but it's not even exclusive to him. The Phobos Lieutenant can bring it, and he is much better than him. Sustained and lethal is a much better combo than precise and lethal. If this guy was maybe 35 points, sure, bring him along. Then you'd actually have a pretty tough character for the cost. But at 55 points, just bring a Phobos Lieutenant who is better in every measurable way and doesn't have the restriction of no deep strike. It's just baffling how bad this guy is and why he doesn't have access to a grav shoot when he is a Reiver. That's like the Reivers' whole thing, the grapnel launchers and the grav shoots, so they can deploy in any position and traverse quickly. This guy is slow as tar because he can't do that. If you do want to run his model, which I'll admit, he's got a pretty nice model. I like it. I like the smoke screen. He's got a cool looking pistol. And the pose is very strong, I think. If you want to run him, just run him as a Phobos Lieutenant. I see zero reason to ever bring the Reiver Lieutenant. It really is... It's honestly baffling how bad this guy is. Like, as I mentioned, I don't think he's just the worst in the Space Marine Codex. I think he's one of the worst data sheets in the game. Anyways, this has been a rather negative video. I've been spoons rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me what you think of this guy. And I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.